everyone. Good afternoon. This has been an amazing day. I've been here all day. I've seen quite a lot of talks. I think a round of applause for the DCMN team who have put on an unbelievably good event today. You know you're at quite a special conference when earlier on one of the speakers had to cancel quite last minute, and the guy who was emceeing the stage just jumped up and did an impromptu talk introducing blockchain, which is a pretty impressive feat. So I have so much respect for everything I've seen today. It's been absolutely brilliant. I'm here to talk about some things that maybe haven't been talked about an awful lot today. And my story begins last year, when a TV madman called Donald Trump decided to run for the US presidency. And Donald Trump decided that the line he was going to use when he ran for the US presidency was "Make America Great Again." Remember that? And quite a few people, because all the world at that time was talking about the American presidential election. And so quite a few campaigns, quite a few companies decided to launch campaigns that referenced the US presidential election. And there was one tech company who decided to have a little bit of fun with that line, "Make America Great Again." And they launched a campaign that was "Make Email Great Again." And they congratulated themselves for being so clever and so witty. And they launched the campaign and they sat back waiting for the fun and the awards to roll in. And what do you think happened, Berlin? People fucking hated it, okay? They got absolutely criticized from all angles for this campaign. Now, fast forward 6 months or so, and I was on a panel with two very, very experienced data marketing guys. And the people who had run that campaign were in the audience for that panel. And they put up during the Q&A section, they put up their hand and they told the story of "Make Email Great Again." And they asked the question, what should we have done? What did we get wrong? Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. It's a terrible joke, okay? It is indeed not a very good joke. But immediately, the two guys who worked in data marketing jumped in. They said, hey, don't worry about it. There's all these sorts of tools where you can test these kind of jokes and see if your users are likely to respond well to it. And that broke my heart, okay? I have spent 10 years working in storytelling and creativity and content, and the idea that you can't make any kind of joke without checking who you're going to offend is pretty depressing. I think, sometimes as marketeers, we forget what it's like to be a human. Take that same example and imagine if you were on a date with somebody, and before you said anything, you had to check if it might offend the person sitting opposite you. Now, the chances are you won't offend them. You'll be safe. But the chances are you won't say anything funny, or anything sexy, or anything memorable, or anything interesting. And I think that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. We've heard an amazing array of speakers talk about data, and talk about learnings, and talk about insights, and talk about analysis. And I think that gets us about 99% of the way there. This doesn't seem to be working. Button on the top. It is indeed. Make presentations great again. And I think the data and the analysis gets us about 99% of the way there. But I think there's a 1%, which is about creativity and about risk-taking. And I'm always a little bit worried that we forget about that when we come to these conferences and we talk about marketing. Because I think without that creativity and without the willingness to take a risk, I don't think we ever produce anything that's magic. I'm absolutely fascinated by magicians. If you think about what magicians do, it is absolutely extraordinary. They walk out on stage in front of a room full of strangers, and they say, you're not going to understand how I do this, but I'm going to blow your mind. If that goes wrong, it is the most embarrassing thing in the world, isn't it? There's cards coming out of your sleeves, there's rabbits hopping around the stage. But if it goes right, that is the best feeling in the world. And I think we learn something from magicians. I'm not saying that every time you take a risk in marketing, it leads to magic. It definitely doesn't. And I think part of being a creative thinker when it comes to marketing is leaving room for stuff that doesn't go right. Going right back to the first talk of today, to Corey's talk, about failing and that culture. But I think we absolutely have to build in that opportunity for things to go right and for that magic to happen. And if we never try, and we never risk offending people or upsetting people, we're never going to get to that magic, and I think that's a real shame. The first admission of my talk is that I'm not a growth marketer. I am a storyteller. I'm a journalist by trade, and I've worked for WeTransfer for the last 2 years. And what really struck me when I joined WeTransfer is they asked me to set up the content department. They knew that they had a lot of users who worked in the creative industries, and they decided that they thought it would be interesting for us to create content and stories aimed at those users. And what I found pretty quickly, both within WeTransfer and being invited to panels or to give talks or to marketing meetups, is there seems to be a way where content and data has become like a war between each other. This is kind of a spoiler if you haven't seen the first series of Game of Thrones, by the way. I'm really sorry, but come on, it was years ago. Right. So this is how the content people see it. The content people see it that they're kind of this, pure storytellers, and that they're not appreciated by the evil data guys, and they just want to take over the world, and they've got no time for content or for stories or for anything you can't measure in a Google sheet. But then I realized, talking to people, that this is how the other guys see it. The data guys see it that they're the people with the facts. They're the people with the insights. They're the people with the analysis. And these smarmy young pretenders, these storytellers, these content people have come along, and suddenly they're getting the attention and they're getting the money. And it's really annoyed them. And I think that we have to stop thinking about this idea of creativity and innovation and inspiration as opposed to data and analysis, and start to think about them working together a little bit more. However, it does still happen. This was an article that was written in the Drum in July by a man called Andy Maslin, and this was the headline of the article. He kind of set out his stall quite early on, what he thought about brands creating content. He called it the great content marketing swindle. And he said this. He said, that's not him, by the way. No. That, I should say that. For legal reasons, that's not him. That is what happens if you Google the phrase midlife crisis on Google image search. Because what he said was that for marketing, content was like it was having a midlife crisis. And we'd gone to the showroom and we'd seen this dazzling new car. That was the analogy that Andy used. He said, it glitters in the showroom and it appears to promise release from the shackles of that period in life when the tried and tested activities, though efficient and useful, no longer excite. This is the absolute best example of content storytelling on the one hand, data and analysis on the other. This is how he ended the article. He said, let's remember that like salaries, plant, advertising, and raw materials, content costs money. It should deliver the same or leave the stage. And I want to say that we shouldn't leave the stage, because I think that if we stay on the stage and we try and do these magical things, that they're not all going to work, but every now and then we're going to create something really exciting and really interesting and really different. And it's not about saying that all the things we've heard today from the amazing people about analysis and data and learnings and insights is wrong. It's just to say that there's that extra 1%, and if we work together, we can unlock something that's really special. I should cycle back a little bit and explain what WeTransfer is, because some of you may not know. WeTransfer was founded by two Dutch entrepreneurs in 2009, a guy who was a blogger and a guy who worked in advertising. And basically, they wanted to come up with the simplest way to send big files between two people. It looks like this, if you don't know what it is. And what they wanted to do was come up with something that was so simple, even their mums could use it. That was kind of the starting thing for WeTransfer. But they made two decisions really early on that are going to be relevant for my story. Right from the beginning, what they decided to do was to put art on the background. So they gave 1/3 of all the backgrounds that appear on WeTransfer to artists, designers, illustrators, musicians, photographers. And what that meant was that when they started, that was obviously quite a small thing. It was a small startup in Amsterdam. They didn't have that many users. And it meant essentially that they could promote the work of their friends, their family, and that kind of thing. But obviously, WeTransfer has grown since 2009. And we now reach 42 million monthly active users in 195 countries. And we still give that 30% of all of our inventory to the creative community. So we made a bet that we wanted to embed our DNA with the creative world. And that was very relevant when I came in, because what they said was that we think we've got a foothold with that community, and we want to work with them, we want to create stories that are going to engage and excite and interest them. A little bit more information about WeTransfer, though, in case you don't know what it is or you haven't really heard of it. Like I say, 42 million monthly active users now in 195 countries. How do you make money? Lots of people ask us that. It's a fair question. We have a pretty much 50-50 revenue split. So half of our money comes from our premium paid-for WeTransfer Plus service, and half of our money comes from advertisers, who is the other, 30% of the inventory goes to advertisers as well, who can buy messages and campaigns and things like that. WeTransfer was bootstrapped to 2015 when we received $25 million investment from venture capitalists. And like I say, this part of our thing, though, what hasn't changed since 2009 is we've always given away this 30% of our wallpapers to support the creative industries. So fast forward until last year, and the guys who run WeTransfer came to me. I'd met them through some other work, and they said, would you be interested in coming in and setting up a content department for WeTransfer? And I was confident, and I pretended I knew what that would mean and what that would look like, and I was just like, yeah, sure, let's go. And so what, I kind of arrived at WeTransfer in Amsterdam, and I said, okay, so what do we know? What do we have about our users? And they were like, well, not a lot. Because one of the things WeTransfer is really big on is it has a very lean data policy. We hardly collect any information about our users. So we didn't know much about our users. We knew that a lot of them worked in the creative industries, and that was about that. And so really, I didn't have any data to go on. I didn't have any analysis to go on. We had to work on instinct. So we gathered a group of people who we thought were interesting storytellers and who we thought understood the creative industries, and we set about creating a content strategy. It really does deserve those. It was a content strategy for WeTransfer. And we came up with 3 rules that we kind of broadly followed across that time. So the first thing, and this is not, none of these are like, wow, oh my God, like, amazing, but they kind of give you a sense of how we structured our content. So the first thing was that content needed to make sense. And we spent a lot of time brainstorming what that meant in a WeTransfer capacity. And this is kind of what WeTransfer believes and why we exist. We believe that being creative is a big part of what makes us human. We believe that creative expression is something that is important and is interesting and should be encouraged. We also believe that everyone has the ability to be creative. That's a really important thing, that creatives are not all hipsters with lush beards and posh coffees, okay? We think that the creative instinct can be found in anyone, anywhere. So, with that in mind, what we want to do is make the creative process as easy and as effortless for anyone who wants to take part in it. So that was the starting point. You will notice, if you're eagle-eyed, there's no stats here. There's no data. I have no graphs in my whole presentation. So any graph fans who are disappointed by that, I'm really sorry. There's going to be no graphs. There's going to be some nice more pictures, though, coming up. And what we did, we decided to say, well, what does the creative process look like? What do we think are the different sections of the creative process? And we came up with this kind of idea that on the one hand, you've got the intent, the ideas, starting to put ideas together. You move through testing, development, refining, and then eventually you're in that stage where you want to share and present ideas. And what, obviously, WeTransfer, where that sits at the moment, is in the share section. It's when you can send ideas, whether that's video files or photographs or presentations, to somebody else. So what we said with the content was, well, why doesn't the content come and sit in that intent and idea? We wanted content that was going to spark off people's creativity and give them the kind of the motivation, the push they needed to hopefully go off and create something themselves. And then from that, we kept workshopping this idea, and we realized that actually it's not a straight line, that process, it's a square. Because if I'm here and I've gone all the way through this circle, and then I present my creative idea, and you see my idea, and then you go off to do it, then you start the circle again. And this was very neat, and it was something that we were able to use in presentations to make up for our lack of statistics and graphs. And so then we got to this idea, was that inspiration means nothing unless you do something with it. I think in creative terms, we've got to an odd stage now where inspiration has become a word that means everything and nothing. People kind of log onto their computer in the morning, get their cup of coffee, and go on an inspiration safari, jumping from sites to sites, hoping to find that thing that fires off their genius idea. And I don't think that's how the mind works, and we don't think that's how creativity works, more importantly. Yes, the intent and the idea is part of it, but it means nothing unless you go off and you use that to go and create something else. So this was kind of our guiding principle, and this shaped some of the content stories that we've told in the first year. So this was one series we did. We were interested in the idea of the spaces that creatives work in. Now, we've all seen those videos or those photo series where they go to a creative workspace and they take photos of them and they're like, hey, look, this is where, Denis Villeneuve works. So if you get the same computer and the same Vitsu bookshelves, you can have creative ideas like Denis Villeneuve. Spoiler alert, you can't, okay? That's not how creativity works. So we decided to do a series where we spoke to 5 different creatives and asked them to describe their dream workplace. And we got some absolutely mad answers back. And then we got an illustrator called Owen Gatley to illustrate them. This was a director of photography who's in New York. She wanted a gong, a giant gong at the back there. I can't remember why. And she wanted a Pomeranian run. So there was constantly be a supply of Pomeranian dogs that would run around her studio and keep her interested. This was a good one. This guy had a very kind of slightly Bond villain lair, I think this. But he wanted art that would fuck with people's heads. That was one of his things. So Owen created this for him. This is Nelly Benayoun, who's a creative and a scientist. She wanted a boat, obviously, that would sail around the world and dock in different places. And it had a disco in the bottom right-hand corner for disco dancing. This is a good one. This is a Singapore creative director, and he wanted Marina Abramovic at all times doing her performance in the middle of his studio. You know that performance of Marina Abramovic, and she sat in galleries and people came and sat opposite her? This is what he wanted. How weird would that be? But he also wanted Miles Davis. So just so weird, but the insight into the creative mind is absolutely fascinating. And this was quite a serious one. This was a writer who actually is based here in Berlin, and he wanted something a little bit more normal. Now, I have no stats or data to show that any of this worked, okay? We do track that kind of thing, we do see on social and that kind of thing, but what we do know is that anecdotally this was something that cut through. It was a content project that people talked about and referenced to us when we had meetings with them. And I know the data, there was at the talk earlier, the guy said, nothing, there is no exceptions, everything is measurable. And I get that, I do understand that. But I think, like I say, there is this space for this little bit of extra stuff, this little bit of interest, a little bit of excitement as well. So that was the first rule we set ourselves. This was the second rule we set ourselves, right? Content needs to be good. Now that sounds amazingly obvious, but anyone who has seen branded content will have been surprised by how many people don't follow this very simple rule. And so one of the things we thought about was, how does the creative process work? And my favorite description of the creative process comes from the graphic designer Paula Scher. And Paula Scher says that when you're a designer and you get a brief for a job, the brief is like a quarter that you put in a slot machine. And then you pull the arm of the slot machine, and in your head is not only where you went to university, or the design books you've read, or the documentaries about creative thinking you've watched. It's also that boring cab ride you had yesterday, or the woman you saw on the underground, or the kite you saw flying as a 7-year-old when you went on holiday with your parents. All this stuff is just rolling around in your head, and you pull the arm, and what you hope is that something really amazing comes up. And so we decided this was quite an interesting starting point for creativity and for content. And so what we started doing was approaching creatives who we admired and saying, what's the other thing? Like, you're famous for doing this, but what's the other thing you do that really excites you? And lots of people gave us interesting ideas, and one of the people who gave us an idea was F.K. Twigs, the British musician. And she basically said that she was fascinated by the way that the cities see themselves and are portrayed by the media. And so what she wanted to do, when she was on tour in North America, she fell in love with Baltimore. And Baltimore is quite a difficult city. There's lots of issues in terms of racism, in terms of poverty. Lots of people only know it from The Wire, for example. It was one of the places during the Black Lives Matter protests as well. And Twig said, I want to make a documentary in Baltimore, and I don't want to do any pre-publicity. So what she did, she tweeted one night, she said, hey, tomorrow we're going to run a dance workshop in Baltimore. And she had no idea if anyone would turn up. And when she turned up at the venue the next day, 400 people were there waiting for her in the blazing heat of a Baltimore summer afternoon. And she had this amazing experience with them. They took them through kind of exercises and things, and then the next day, she chose 15 of them, and she took them on stage at her concert in Baltimore, on stage with her. And we said, that sounds amazing. We would love to tell that story with you. And so we created this.
I was welcomed into a community that is just powerful.
So that's the trailer for the Baltimore Dance Project documentary that we produced last year. Still gives me goosebumps when we watch that, particularly when I get a chance to watch it on a big screen, because I don't get to do that very often. It's very exciting for me. But again, thinking about the talks and things we've heard today, we had no insight that this was going to be something that would work for our audience. We're not particularly big in the Baltimore dance community. It was the idea we loved and the story we loved and the passion that Twigs had for the project that we loved. And what's great about it, you can find it online if you Google Twigs and WeTransfer, is that on the one hand, you can watch it as a documentary which is about a creative workshop, a dance workshop in Baltimore. But it's also this story that picks up on ideas of race and sexuality and identity and the media and the way we see ourselves and the way others see us. And so it became this really interesting content project. But I don't think it's the kind of thing that would ever have come out from a very well-structured, well-regulated marketing meeting. It came out of a hunch, and we decided to do it, and we were lucky that it came off in the way that we hoped it would. The third thing, and there's some nice pictures. Yeah, these are some of the dancers that turned up for the workshop. So this was the third thing we realized. So to go back to that first slide, the Game of Thrones slide of Joffrey and Ned Stark, is that they don't need to be mortal enemies, that actually it's much more exciting and much more interesting when they work together. And over the 2 years of running this content team at WeTransfer, we have started to use data more. That's not to say that we slavishly follow data. We don't create content projects based only on insights that are given to us, but we do try and work together with our data and analysis teams to try and create stuff still with that element of magic or that sprinkling of something different. And I think a good example of this was a photographer called... So one of the insights we got was that this year, JPEG photography became the most shared file on WeTransfer, and any content we did around photography tended to really resonate with our audience. And particularly, our fastest growing market is in America, so we wanted to do some content that was aimed at the American audience. And this is this is not the photographer, this is a picture she took, a lady called Nadia Lee Cohen, and she decided, she was in a Walmart store in California, and she was really struck by this woman who was working in the Walmart store and the way the light kind of fell on her. And so she said, well, I'd like to drive around California and find people in bars or in the DMV or in Walmarts or in Blockbuster video shops, and I want to take their photographs in really stylized, glamorous ways. And so she created this set of photographs that were kind of unlike anything we'd seen before, and she worked with the people to bring out the narrative and the costume that they wanted. This guy, look at this, amazing. I don't know where he got that coat from. It doesn't matter. So she created this thing for us, and then we go and we work with our design and our creative teams to build that into be something which is an interactive experience on WeTransfer, which you can explore. And we also had audio files. We had some insights from the data team that people were spending much longer with audio than they were with video. So actually, we decided to combine the audio and the photographs in this project. So I said at the beginning, I wasn't going to go and talk about data, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But I do think it's really important to know that, like I say, it's the data and the analysis and the insight that gets us 99% of the way there. But then I think it's the creative thinking and the hunch and the idea and the spark that gets you on that 1 extra %, which I just think is really... That was good. That was one of my designers who did that. And so, 2 years later, what have we learned and what have we achieved? And I think we have, got some statistics that tell us that people are engaging with our content, and that's good. But I think the brand factor with this unexpected and unusual and innovative content is something that's more interesting. This was a profile that was written about WeTransfer earlier this year, and the journalist wrote that file transferring is not an especially sexy sector. And I think I have to admit that that's true. But, and yet, somehow, WeTransfer is cool. And when I'm in the internal meetings with people who have amazing data to back up their insights, and I have almost no data, this is the kind of thing I have to bring to the table. I have to say that I'm not sure this is measurable. I'm not sure you're going to see this on certain stuff. But I do think this is important, and I do think it's resonating, and I do think we should keep doing it. So that's how this idea of creativity and inspiration, I think, has informed an ongoing content plan that we've had. But I wanted to finish off talking about one example that happened in June this year on a specific project that we worked on. And you might remember that SoundCloud made the announcement that they were going to lay off 170 people from their offices because they were restructuring. And what happens, most of you probably know that what happens in those circumstances is that spreadsheets go round to lots of big tech companies saying, here are the 170 people, and you can email them and say, offer them a job, and that would be really good. And two of my colleagues were in Los Angeles, and they were talking about this, and they said, well, you know, SoundCloud was such an, it still is, but you know, when it started particularly was this innovative, exciting company that was going to change the way we relate to music, and that sounded really exciting. And so my boss, the CMO, said, well, why don't we write to all of those 170 people and ask them not to get a job, and ask them instead to offer them, almost no strings attached, $10,000 to take a couple of months and think about an idea for something new, for something that encompassed that spirit of SoundCloud. So we sent it over. We had some discussions within the marketing team. We talked about the potential risks, of which there were many. Did it look like a really lazy publicity stunt? Did it look like we were dancing on the grave of a company that we really liked and admired and that kind of thing? And eventually we decided that we wanted to have a go. We wanted to try and do it. And we sent it to the CEO for approval. And we said, do you mind if we do this thing where we're going to write to 170 people from SoundCloud? And he said, no, I don't mind. I think it's quite an interesting idea. Just send me the stats that you're basing this on. And we had a choice, Berlin. We had a choice, which was, do we lie to the CEO of our company and make up some stats that we didn't have? Or did we try and get him to take a chance to say, we don't have any data. You know, this is the make email great again. We just think this might be an interesting idea. And we decided not to lie because we're honest. And we said, look, we don't have any. We've got no sense that this will work, but we think it's worth trying. And we did it. And what happened was amazing, was that we got a huge amount of press coverage in lots of different places. We got some fantastic requests from old SoundCloud employees with ideas of projects that they wanted to launch that we could help them with. So we were very smug about that. But then obviously the real kicker to it was that a few weeks later, we looked at the usage data for WeTransfer about how many files were sent around the period that this ran in the summer of this year. And it was up. It was massively up from what we would usually expect at that time of year. And so that was really exciting. That was something that we didn't plan. I would be lying if we said, well, we're going to do this project, and we expect a 17.5% increase in files transferred. We had no idea. But yet it led to something that did have data and did have analysis. So I suppose if I leave you on anything today, it's to remember the magicians. It's to remember that crazy, terrifying tightrope of walking out there and going, I don't quite know how this is done, but I'm going to be amazed and I'm going to be astonished by it. And again, that's not to say that all the stuff we've heard today about insight and data and statistics and analysis, that all still stands. It's all still really important. But I think every now and then we should walk out onto the stage like this guy. And I hope that if you take one message away from my talk today, Berlin, is that you go back to your work over the next few weeks and maybe, just maybe, try and make a little bit of magic alongside the other stuff that you're doing. Thank you very much.
Wow, Rob, thank you so much for that awesome closing keynote. I think if we want to, we can take a question or two, if you don't mind.
Right.
Do we have anything from the audience? Rare opportunity to ask a closing keynote a question. We do have one in the back. Do we still have a mic runner?
Yeah, I'm over here. Thank you very much for this very inspiring talk, and it's definitely going to get me to actually take some action. I wanted to ask a question about failure in this case, because of course this is a lot of magic, and without the data, data kind of gives us some secure safety net, maybe that we're not going to fail that bad because we have all this nice insight. Do you have any experience with that, and how did you deal with that in the past at WeTransfer?
Again, I think it goes back to Corey's talk at the beginning. we definitely do have some experience of that. I tend not to put it in my keynotes, maybe I should. But I think it's about being honest about what fails. It's about learning our lessons and making sure that we don't repeat that. But I'll tell you, I think a really important thing is having the confidence to kill an idea before you launch it. It's interesting when you hear, I remember hearing an interview with the guy, did anyone listen to S-Town, the podcast that the guys who did Serial did earlier this year? It was like this crazy, most successful podcast ever. It has like 10 million downloads. And someone asked him, why are the Americans the best at making podcasts? And he said, well, because for every one you see, there's 5 you don't see. And even though we might have spent time and effort and money developing it, if it's not quite right and it's not coming together, we'll kill it. We won't do that. So I think that's the thing. It's almost pre-failing, to coin a completely ridiculous phrase. I think it's about being really honest with yourself that if something isn't working, that we pull away from it.
We have one all the way in the back left.
Hi, I had a question about your content team. How many people are on it? Is it like videographers, photographers, a graphic designer, and what kind of output do you actually make?
So at the moment, I think we have about 4 people working full-time on content, but they all tend to be commissioners. For the actual skills, we tend to freelance that out, whether that's photography, illustration, or videography. We choose people to work with. So the people that we have, I think, are people who understand the kind of cultural zeitgeist and are able to pick stories or projects to support that feel relevant and feel like they matter, rather than just doing content for the sake of it. We produce quite a lot of content. I think we produce between 3 and 4 bigger pieces a month, and then a whole load of smaller pieces during that time, like smaller written pieces. I think the really important thing for a content team, particularly in a brand environment, is consistency. I think there's something really, really weird if a brand says they're going to do content and then, for a week they do like 6 pieces and then they don't do anything for 8 months and then they do another 3. And I think it just really confuses the user. I think the really important thing for a brand doing content is to set out a very clear parameters to say this is what you can expect from us in terms of content, and to make sure you try and stick to that.
I think we'd have time for one last question if we had one.
How big was the rise in file transfers after the SoundCloud campaign?
It was double digits in terms of percentage.
That's it. I struggle to see the connection between, as great as the idea was, this campaign, and the urge to send the file to someone else. So.
Well, I think that's a really good point, and that's one of the things that the content team has struggled with in the past. We can't force people to have a big file to send. As much as we try. There's nothing we can do. If you haven't got a massive photo set to send, you haven't got one, that's fine. So I think with something like that, and I think with a lot of the content we do, it's about putting ourselves into people's minds for other reasons, so that that time when they do have a big file to send, that it's wobbling around in there. I think with the SoundCloud thing, it was that we got so much press in a very short space of time, and so I think that we were top of mind people for a long time. But yeah, it's a really good point, and I think it's something that I've had to maybe explain internally to my colleagues as well, is that it's not about spending a lot of time and money doing a video with twigs in Baltimore, and then telling this very moving, emotional story about identity. And then at the end, like, why not send a file on WeTransfer.com? Like, that's a way to kill a content idea straight away. So yeah, we have to be very honest about that relationship between the content and the usage, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, you guys, I think that's all the time that we have. Rob, again, thank you so much. Really awesome keynote.
Thank you.